Hi, I'm Stephen Lefkoff, a Georgia attorney at Lefkoff Law, where we represent car companies. I'm talking about dealers, manufacturers, finance providers, auctions, repo, repair, storage, you name it. If you're a car business owner, we work with you. And today we're starting a very exciting series. It is on the life of a car. And you can see behind me, of course, when I turn around, there are no cars. How is that possible? But what we're about to do is we're about to talk about all the cars passing behind me and how they get to where they are and what's going to happen to them over their entire life cycle. So we're going to first start with manufacturing, right? These are your Fords, GMs, Chevrolets, Kia, Hyundai, Porsche, you name it. These are the companies that are manufacturing the vehicles that you are driving or that you are selling or that you are financing. Okay, now here's how it all starts. About 5 to 6 to 7 years, depending on the manufacturer, before the actual car ends up on the lot, they start in the design process. And the design process for manufacturing a car usually starts with investigation. And what I mean by investigation is figuring out who's the target market, what kind of car are they trying to make, what type of budget, what are the numbers, how many are they going to produce, where are they going to be sold, because it's very different selling a car to a United States audience versus selling a car to, say, a European audience or the Asian market audience, right? These are all different markets, and people in those markets buy different things. Not only that, the manufacturers have different obligations when it comes to compliance, and I'm talking about government compliance. The regulations here in the United States are very different than the regulations, say, in Germany or in the UK or in China, or in India. All very different. So the car manufacturer first starts with, okay, what kind of car do we want to make? Where do we want this thing to be sold? How many of them are we going to make? What's the demand, size, shape, all of that stuff? Then they figure out, okay, we need to then go to design. So they send it to their design team to design the actual vehicle itself. And they're still taking in a lot of advice. They're getting surveys done. They're bringing in study groups, focus groups. They're working on all of this stuff to design the car. Now you're like 4 to 5 years out from when the car is actually going to be hitting the road. In design, they then go into engineering, right? So the design people say this is what it should look like. They build out these models. They do all of that stuff of what the design of the vehicle should look like. Then they send it to engineering so that the engineers can figure out, okay, how are we going to make this work? The engineers will then make it work, right? So they're figuring out the different parts and pieces and what's going to have to go into it, and how are they going to produce this vehicle that the design people have designed after the heads, the think tank people at the beginning, have figured out what kind of car they need to make. That's when they go through different iterations of the actual vehicle. The engineers are making different models, tweaking different things, making different things. They're announcing, some manufacturers will announce them at way ahead of time of the kind of vehicle they're making. Some keep all of this under wraps. Then they're going to work, at some point, they're going to work with the government to figure out, okay, what regulations do they need to hit, right? What, in this car, does it have to have a certain number of airbags? Does it have to do, blinkers have to be in a certain position so they can be seen in a certain way? Are there certain ground clearance requirements? What requirements? Emissions are a big deal. What emissions requirements do they have? Gas, fuel mileage. What are all of these things go into the development of the car? Then they start producing the car. Well, now they have to talk about facilities, right? Where are they going to make this? Are they going to import it? Are they going to export it? Where are they going to get their parts? Are they going to make parts in-house? Are they going to import parts from all over the world from different manufacturers? And different car companies have different policies and procedures on what parts they make in-house and what parts they bring in-house, meaning they import from other manufacturers. So then they've got to figure out, okay, that's the manufacturing piece, raw materials, all of that stuff. They then have to actually build the car. And now the United States is becoming a far better place for these manufacturers to build than it used to be many, many years ago. Now you have pretty much every manufacturer that sells in the United States has a manufacturing facility here within the country. There are a lot where I am in Georgia is growing, South Carolina, Alabama. There's a lot in the Southeast, but they're kind of sprinkled all over the place as well. Just the manufacturers have different places. So then the considerations become about the facility, right? Where are they going to put it? What kind of tax incentives are they going to get? What kind of lease incentives? Are they buying property? Are they leasing it? What needs to go into the facility? How many, machinery? Where are they getting the machinery? Are they manufacturing that? Are they importing that? You can see that there are a lot of considerations when it comes to actually manufacturing the vehicle. Production lines, right? What production lines are going to be for what vehicles, and how are they setting that up? Employment, how many hundreds or maybe thousands of employees do they need working on that particular vehicle? What about software? What about the technical basis for the way different things operate? What about maintenance of the machinery that's actually putting together the car, right? The robots, who's maintaining those? What kind of staff do they need for that? All of that, and we're still not even at the point where the car is being sold. So there are so many things that go into place when we're talking about manufacturing a vehicle. Then, let's say you've now gone through all of that, your Honda, your Hyundai, your Porsche, your Lexus, your Toyota, your whoever you are, you've now made the car, or you're a startup, you're Lucid, you're Rivian, you are any one of those manufacturers as well, where they're just getting off the ground with this stuff, right? You can look at it like Ford's been doing this for 100 years. They don't have the same first time issues, although they do. I mean, look, the Lightning, they're going into electrics, that's all new stuff, right? But you've now gotten to the point where you've thought of the type of car you want to make, you've designed the car, engineering has approved all the engineering designs, you've gotten with your lawyers as the manufacturer, with your lobbyists, you figured out, okay, this car meets the standards of the country where we want to sell it, and now you've gone on to manufacture it. Well, now you got to figure out, okay, how are we going to sell it? And the traditional method is the franchise. Next video, we're going to talk about selling cars. So now the car has been manufactured, right? We've got production lines, we're making the thing. How is it being sold? Well, now there are really two methods to selling a new car. There's the franchise model, which has dominated for years and years and years, decades even. And then there's the direct-to-consumer model, which is much, much newer and circumvents the franchises. You see that traditionally, I shouldn't say traditionally because it's really the new manufacturers. The direct-to-consumer model really we see now with Tesla and Rivian are the two big players in direct-to-consumer. The franchises, they're still a thing for entities like Ford, Honda, Chevrolet, Toyota, etc., etc. You guys have all seen the franchises wherever, in whatever town you are in. The direct-to-consumer model is the quick, easiest way with the lowest amount of overhead. And the way that traditionally works is that the dealer has a website, the manufacturer has a website set up. Consumers go on the website, they order or pre-order the car that they want, and they wait. And sometimes they're putting down deposits, other times they're not. Sometimes the deposit is refundable, sometimes it isn't. These are all decisions that have to go into whether or not or how the manufacturer is going to sell the car. Of course, it eliminates the middleman of the franchise. In theory, that saves the manufacturer a lot of money. It also eliminates salespeople, right? In a lot of the cases, they don't have salespeople, they just have a website. And consumers are just deciding to buy an $80,000 car without ever really seeing it, which is unheard of historically. But now this is the market. This is the way it goes. So the direct-to-consumer model, much more simple. Cars available on the website. You book it. It gets delivered to your house, or you go to some service center to pick it up, and that's how that works. And the service center would also be the place where you would go to get repairs for your car. The franchise model is a lot more complicated. The manufacturer doesn't actually sell the vehicle to the consumer. It's a common misconception. The franchise dealer sells the car to the consumer. What I mean by that is that the dealer is the one that's actually bought the car from the manufacturer or has been assigned the car from the manufacturer. And the dealer is the seller. So if you're a consumer and you're going to buy a Ford truck from Stevens Ford, then you are not actually buying it from Ford. You're buying the truck from Stevens Ford, from my dealership, not from the manufacturer directly. That impacts a lot of things. It impacts fees, it impacts the relationship, it impacts how you handle repairs, it impacts a whole lot of things, okay? But at the end of the day, the consumer gets the car. The franchise dealer has kickback incentives back to the manufacturer on number of units sold, of time they're on the lot, of different features, of different add-ons they sell. There's a whole host of things that the franchise dealer makes money on for selling the car. But at the end of the day, this is the first moment where the consumer now takes possession of the car. Whether they get it directly from the manufacturer on, let's say, a website purchase, or whether they get it from a franchise dealer. That's when the consumer first gets the car. This is where stuff's going to get real exciting because we're going to talk about the life cycle of the car. Before we do that, though, now that the consumer has the car, the next video we're going to talk about finance and how the financing works for that consumer to get that car. Before we go any further, I want to take a step back and talk about how the vehicle gets from the manufacturer to the dealership to be sold to the consumer, right? And there are three main ways that vehicles get transported: train, truck, and boat. Boat, of course, if they're coming from overseas, train and truck if they're coming from within the United States. Although I will tell you, most of the time trucks are involved, it is when they've come overseas from a boat and then they get trucked to the final destination. That also happens, by the way, from train transport as well. They get, of course, trucked since we don't have train stations at every dealership, or probably any dealership. So if you think about it, there's another stage here between when the car is manufactured and when it ends up being sold, and that is the transportation process. This is another logistical piece to the sale of a car. The car has to actually get to the dealership. And in our firm, in our work that we do for car companies, we see transport problems all the time. We see it. Look, the Golden Ray ship, look it up on Google. The Golden Ray sunk over the Savannah, outside the port of Savannah or Brunswick, right out here in Georgia off the coast, 3.5 hours from my office. The Golden Ray had a ton of cars on it and it sunk. What happens when that happens? Well, you got a mess on your hands, right? Of course you have a mess on your hands because those assets are very, very valuable. So you have that problem. There are train derailments and train problems. There are lots of trucking accidents and truck problems. Here's the biggest issue right now that we're seeing because of the way the supply chain is and how difficult it is to get vehicles. What we're seeing is when somebody, a consumer, is waiting on a car that they've ordered, the car is manufactured and it's on its way, and then there's a problem in transport, right? The truck's involved in an accident. Now you have another delay to getting the consumer the vehicle that they've ordered. And that delay could be 6 months because you got to manufacture another one and you've got a consumer complaint. So the transport process in and of itself is particularly complicated, not to mention there are all kinds of issues with insurance, with licensing, with materials, and with reliability, and with dates and deadlines and when you're expecting these things. All of that stuff goes into the transportation bubble. Okay? And there are issues abound in transportation of vehicles, but the consumer doesn't normally think about this stuff. The consumer is just excited to get a car from the lot. They meet their friend Steven, the dealer, they buy from Steven, the dealer, they drive off the lot, and now they've got their car. They don't think about all the steps that have to go into getting the car from design, which we talked about, to production, which we talked about, to transport, which we've now talked about, onto the dealer's lot, and then sold. Okay, let's talk about financing, and we're going to specifically talk about new car financing. So when a customer gets financed on a new car, the finance company is going to have something called a security interest in the vehicle. What that means is if there's a default, if the customer doesn't pay, then the finance company can then go and take the car because they have an interest in getting paid, and that interest in getting paid is secured by the vehicle. That's very different than a credit card, let's say, which is unsecured, which means if the consumer doesn't pay for their credit card account, the credit card company can't go and take their car or take their house or take their television or their furniture because the credit card is not secured. The credit card company has to sue the consumer, has to get a judgment against the consumer, and then can go use the consumer's assets to pay off the judgment. They don't get to just do it. Car finance is very different. Car finance is almost always secured by the car. How does that work? They get a lien on the title, and the finance company generally will hold the title until the car is paid off. Once the car is paid off, or the account's paid off, then they will release the title. Until that point, they have the right to repossess the car in the event of a non-payment. Now, that is how generally financing works. Who arranges for the financing? Well, it can go a couple of ways. One way is for the consumer to arrange for it. Consumer comes into the dealer's lot and says, I'm ready to pay for this brand new, we'll keep using Ford because it's fun. I'm going to pay for this brand new Ford Lightning. I have a check from my credit union that I'm going to use to pay for this Lightning. The credit union gets a recorded lien on the title, and then the credit union accepts the payments from the consumer. That's a standard purchase transaction. The other way, which is also standard, is dealer arranged financing. Now, in that case, the dealer has an arrangement with different finance providers, just like an insurance broker. The dealer becomes a finance broker. Consumer walks in, consumer says they have this credit score, they give them the information on a credit application, the dealer runs the credit app, and then the dealer arranges for financing and works the deal in such a way that they get, most of the time, some kind of points on the deal. They get a kickback of some sort for arranging that financing. So in a lot of cases, the dealer finance is the way that dealers want to make the deal happen because there's more incentive in it for the dealer. They'll offer the consumer more incentives to take a dealer financed option because they know on the back end they're getting that deal. Now for us, as the law firm that represents car companies, we are regularly reviewing those finance arrangements for dealers. We are regularly talking to dealers about the good and the bad of the dealer agreements. We're going to get into more of that, especially when it comes to used cars in a few more videos. But that is how the financing works on the new car franchise dealer sales model. The consumer either brings the financing themselves or the dealer provides the financing. Now, there's all kinds of crazy things that can go haywire in financing, okay? And they sometimes will apply to the dealer. Sometimes they'll just apply to the finance company. Most of the time, there's no issue. But when there is an issue, it can be a huge issue. However, I'm not going to get into that in these videos because that's what we do in our law firm. But the purpose of these videos is to talk about the life of the car, not the life of the financing arrangement. We'll do a whole separate set on the life of finance. But now we're going to move into what happens when a car becomes a used car. This is when it's going to get really, really fun.